Alright, welcome back to the last part of our book, Chocolate Fever. So far we've met Henry. Eats chocolate all the time. Started developing brown spots all over himself. Those started popping out bigger and more like lumps. So Henry ran away from the hospital and ran away from his family, where he met up with Mac, the truck driver. And when we last left off, they were being hijacked by Louie and Lefty, who then found out that they thought they were stealing furs, but were actually stealing chocolate bars. And so Louie and Lefty were going to take Truck, Mac, and Henry back to their hideout to figure out what they were going to do. So let's see how the book ends. Chapter 10, Taking a Licking. They traveled for a long time. Lefty was driving very carefully, making sure he kept the big truck within the speed limit. From his perch up in the bunk, Max was keeping a watchful eye on their route. Henry tried to keep watch too, but as the hours flew by, he found himself nodding. He was soon asleep, his head cradled on Max's chest. As the first streaks of dawn appeared in the eastern sky, the big man was still holding his arms about the boy, cushioning his body from the shocks and jolts of the road. As the truck shifted gears and slowed, Henry's eyes opened. "Shh," Mac whispered, a finger held to his lips. "Where are we?" Henry whispered in return. Max put his mouth almost against Henry's ear before he answered. "Far out in the country," he said, "a long way from nowhere." "Now when we get where we're going," he continued, "I want you to keep a sharp eye on me. Don't do anything sudden and don't run. Let's just be very careful, hear?" Henry nodded. He would follow Max's lead and do as he was told. The big man was a person who you could trust, especially in a tight spot. They were traveling along a 2-lane road now, with just a few houses set wide apart. Lefty was driving the big truck very slowly, looking right and left at every crossroad. "Any time now, we're going to turn off," Mac whispered. Henry agreed. They must be very close to the thieves' hideout, he thought. Lefty slowed the truck almost to a crawl and turned down a small dirt road. The truck bounced along the narrow track, turning right and left through the trees, and in a few moments came to a stop in a grove of pines near a small wooden cabin. When Lefty had turned off the motor, Louie called up to them, "Gentlemen, we have arrived. Last stop, everybody off." Lefty and Louie opened the cab doors and stepped down out of the truck. "Easy now, you two," Louie said as Mac and Harry joined them. "No sudden moves, no funny business, no tricks, right?" "No tricks," Matt said quietly. Louie had his gun in his hand again. Henry could see, with the gun pointed squarely at Mac, the thieves led them into the cabin. It had one room, dirty and desolate looking. A wooden table and a chairs stood in the corner, and Louie prodded Mac and Henry in that direction. There were no windows in the cabin, and no light either, until Louie lit a small lantern that hung from the rafters. Lefty pulled a chair over near the door and sat there, gun in hand, watching carefully. "Well now," Mac said, "what comes next?" "What comes next is up to you," Louie said. "Play it smart and we'll leave you here when the job's over. Give us trouble and just don't give us trouble." With that, Louie drew a chair over near Lefty and the two of them fell into a quiet conversation. Lefty was angry, that much was clear. "What do we do with a load of candy?" they heard him say. Louie spent most of his energy trying to keep Lefty calm. "Looks like our friend over here bought a pack of trouble," Max said to Henry. "Instead of furs, they got something they don't want." "Haha," said Henry, and they both had a quiet chuckle, followed by several minutes of quiet giggles. And when their mirth had subsided, Henry asked Mac what was really going to happen. "I don't know," Max said, "except for this. If either of them tries to put a hand on you, I will personally lay them out flat. Gun or no gun. So don't you worry, hear?" There was a kind of iron in Mac's voice now, and Henry's sure that when the moment came, the big man would be ready for it. Just then, out of the corner of his eyes, Henry heard a faint and faraway sound. It could have been a dog barking. Mac heard it too. The two of them sat quietly listening. It was barking all right, but now there seemed to be 2 dogs barking. Mac put his hands on Henry's arm. "No noise now," he said. "Listen." The barking dogs got louder and closer, and the seconds ticked by. Louie and Lefty had heard it too. They stood near the closed door, listening for all they were worth. You had to be deaf not to hear the chorus of yelps and yowls. It was getting louder and louder with every moment. "Keep them covered," Louie shouted against the din. "I'm going to see what's happening." Lefty shuffled over to the corner where Mac and Henry sat. His drawn pistol looking them straight in the eyes. Louis, gun in hand, opened the door and froze on the spot, but only for a split second. For at that exact moment, a big German Shepherd came sailing through the doorway and landed on Louis's chest. Louis was knocked flat on his back. His pistol clattered across the floor. Behind the German Shepherd came a whole army of yelping, barking dogs, all heading straight for Henry. Airedales, Dobermans, a brown and white collie, several spaniels and setters, and a small French poodle. They were yelping and jumping and barking enough to fill the little cabin with noise and confusion. Lefty was stunned, speechless, absolutely confused by the dog riot that was taking place before him. But Mac knew what it was about. In a flash, he pounced on Lefty and took the pistol right out of his hand. Then he leapt to where Louis's gun had fallen and scooped that one up too. One gun in each hand, Max whirled to face a pair of confused crooks. Louis was still on the floor. Lefty was surrounded by a pack of yipping, yapping dogs. Even if he wanted to run, he couldn't. Henry, of course, was the star attraction for the animal army. They were licking him as if he were some sort of new dog yummy. His arms and legs and face were covered with happy licking dogs. And all of it made him laugh so hard he could scarcely protest. While this is going on, still more dogs were racing into the tiny cabin, and behind them came people, most of them with leashes in their hands, all of them with the same puzzling story. So there's all the dogs coming in, licking Henry. I wonder why they came in. I bet you know already. They had been out walking their dogs when one after the other the animals put their noses in the air, sniffed wildly, and then began racing madly along the dirt road, as if following an irresistible scent. Now, what could have made these animals behave so strangely? And what about those pistols? What was going on in this cabin anyways? Why did the place smell like a chocolate shop? It took about an hour and the arrival of the local police to sort it all out. Max had a lot of explaining to do, but when it was over, Louis and Lefty were handcuffed. As they were being led away, Henry heard Lefty muttered, "We go after furs, we get candy bars. We get to our hideout and we're invaded by dogs. It's getting so a guy can't make a dishonest living anymore." "Haha," said Max and Henry together. As the police car turned out of sight, the end of the tree-lined dirt road, they were still laughing. "Come on, kid," said Mac, between chuckles. "We still got some candy to deliver." Alright, that's the end of that chapter. So, they got taken where? Max and Henry were taken to Lefty and Louie's hideout, way out in the middle of nowhere, where they should be safe from anybody or anything. Nobody should know they're there. But they heard a noise. What was the noise? Those dogs barking. More and more dogs barking. And when they opened the door to see what it was, the dogs jumped in. They started licking Henry. Why do we think the dogs came? And they were not any special dogs. They were just people's dogs that they were walking. Why do we think those dogs found Henry? They smelled the chocolate. His chocolate fever. They could smell it. Alright. Chapter 11. At Sugar Cane's is the name of it. His name was Alfred Kane, but his friends called him Sugar. Sugar Cane was the owner of one of the largest candy distributing companies in the East. Chances are, if you ever bought a candy bar east of Ohio River, it came from Alfred Kane's warehouse. It was a very large business. But Sugar Cane was still interested in everyone who worked for him, so when he saw Mac's big rig pulled into the warehouse yard, Mr. Kane was very much relieved. So was Max and Henry. They had made that telephone call to Miss Green, you see, and happy, tearful conversation it was. As soon as Max dropped off his load of candy, he was going to take Henry home. Henry liked Mr. Crane the minute he saw him. There was something about the twinkle in his eye that even his spectacles didn't hide that made him seem friendly. And with his gray hair and mustache, Mr. Kane looked not a little like Santa Claus. Henry liked Mr. Crane's office too. It was warm and cozy, and the walls were lined with shelves containing every single product the big warehouse handled. Imagine seeing every kind of candy bar, cookie, and cake all in one spot. It made you hungry just to be there. When they had seated themselves and recounted their adventures, laughing quite a bit in the bargain, Mr. Crane leaned forward in his chair and took a long, close look at Henry. "Henry Green," he said, "if it won't offend you, I would like to ask you something about all those big brown spots you seem to have all over." It seemed to Henry that he had explained a million times already, but he went through the story again from beginning to end. Mr. Crane was listening closely, paying keen attention to Henry's every word. When Henry finished, Mr. Crane spoke. And you say that this Dr. Fargo of yours called it chocolate fever, eh? I find that terribly interesting. I find it just plain terrible, said Henry. Big, brown, ugly spots all over, looking like a freak, people staring at me, and all because of chocolate? And all because of chocolate, Mr. Crane echoed. He shook his head once or twice, and a strange look came over his face. There was a long silence. When Alfred Kane spoke again, it was in a quiet voice. Henry Green, he said, let me tell you a story. It's about a boy I once knew. A boy like you. Oh, this boy loved chocolate too, like you once did. Chocolate in the morning? Yes. Morning, noon, and night he ate the magic stuff. And if you think you have invented new ways of chocolateness, so did this lad. Chocolate-covered fried chicken, chocolate French toast with chocolate syrup. There was no end to the ways of chocolate with this boy. And I'm speaking of... And like you, a strange thing happened to him. In fact, the very same thing. You mean? Said Henry suddenly excited. Yes, the old man with a nod, big brown spots all over. Chocolate fever? Henry exclaimed. The very same. Henry could hardly contain himself. But how was he cured, you mean? Alfred Kane was smiling now. Well, the cure was in two parts, and the first was the most important. You see, this boy I once knew had to learn a very sad lesson, as all young people must do. Although life is grand, and pleasure is everywhere, we can't have everything we want, every time we want it. It's a hard lesson, but it comes in time. Henry said, Yes, Henry said, I think I understand. Maybe I have had too much of a good thing. Indeed. I'll eat less chocolate then. Only when I really want to. Very good. That's half the battle. In the second half, Henry asked. Alfred Kane smiled. Very simple. When you think about it, what is the exact opposite of chocolate? What is the one flavor that is the reverse of chocolate we know and love? Vanilla. Mr. Kane walked slowly to his desk, opened the top right-hand drawer, and brought out a small white box. Vanilla pills, Henry Green. The very thing that will cure your chocolate fever within the hour. That is, if you have truly learned the first and hardest part of your cure. Henry could hardly speak. He wanted to laugh. He was so happy. He wanted to cry. He was so sad. But all he could do was nod. Wahoo! Said Mac with a whoop. Vanilla pills. Who would have thought it? There's one more thing, Mr. King said. That young man I spoke about, the one who reminded me so much of you. Yes? Well, there's Mr. Green giving Henry the pills. Mr. Kane, sorry. When he grew up, he decided to spend his whole life bringing joy and happiness to others. And the way he did it, you see, was to bring chocolate to the world. To make sure that when anyone wanted pleasure, there would be chocolate someplace close by. Henry thought he knew who the other boy was. His name? He asked. His name was Alfred Kane, said Alfred Kane, but his friends called him Sugar. Mr. Kane stepped forward and shook Henry's hand. Now you run along with Mac, and if you take those pills on the way, I guarantee that your chocolate fever will be gone by the time you get home. Goodbye now, and remember what I've said. Goodbye, Mr. Kane, said Henry. You can call me Sugar, and you can call me Henry. All right, that's the end of that chapter. So, we meet Mr. Alfred Sugar Kane, and he owns a chocolate factory. He tells Henry a story. What was that story? Yeah, it was a story about a boy just like Henry who ate chocolate all day, all night, just like Henry. Broke out into brown spots, just like Henry. But this boy got his under control. What were the two ways that he got, the two parts that he do to get his under control, the other boy? Weird question, sorry, I didn't say that right. But what are the two ways you can cure chocolate fever? Okay, the first one was don't eat chocolate all the time. Don't, just because you can doesn't mean you have to. Save it some, eat other stuff. Too much of a good thing is never a good thing. The other one was vanilla pills. Cure them within an hour. So, Henry and Mac, well, we also found out who the boy was. So who was the boy that Alfred Sugar Kane was talking about to Henry? It was Alfred Sugar Cane. He went on to open a candy shop for distribution to send chocolate all over the world to make other kids happy. Alright, the final chapter. Chapter 12. The Lesson Learned. Hey, sleepyhead, said Miss Green, shaking Henry's shoulder ever so gently. Are you going to sleep forever? Henry stretched and yawned, smiling up at his mother. It was good to be back in his own bed, good to be where he belonged. It was Sunday in the Green household. In fact, it was Sunday all over the world, and in the dining room, all the Greens were having a late and lazy breakfast. If you can shake a leg just a little, Miss Green went on, I think we might manage to have some pancakes ready for you, dear, just the way you like them. Henry hopped out of bed. He felt wonderful this morning, the way he always used to feel. He brushed his teeth carefully and paused on his way to the breakfast table, only to make a few ugly faces at himself in a mirror. With all those brown spots gone, forever he hoped, he didn't look half bad except when he crossed his eyes. There was a big greeting for Henry when he sat down at the table. Elizabeth, who was wearing her special blue dressing gown, even kissed him, and Mark stopped eating long enough to stick out his hand and ruffle Henry's hair. There's a lot of news for you today, Henry, Daddy Green said as Henry was drinking his orange juice. The company that makes all those candy bars sent me a letter. They want to give you some kind of award for helping foil the kid hijacking. Really, Dad? Said Elizabeth. That's super. Yes, indeed, Henry's father went on. It surely is. And Matt called just a few minutes ago. He wanted to know if you could go over to his house tomorrow and have dinner with his family. Could we, Dad? Asked Henry. Gee, that's swell. Right, son, we certainly can. And Nurse Molly Farthing is dropping by this afternoon just to say hello. And there's even more news. My goodness, said Mrs. Green on her way to the table of Henry's pancake. Everything seems to happen to our Henry. Dr. Fargo wants to see you after school on Monday. Do I have to? Said Henry. Yes, you have to, Dr. Green said. Okay, said Henry, although he didn't like it. He's a good doctor, dear, Henry's mother said. And if you like, I'll go with you. Now here's your pancakes, she said as she placed the steaming stack before Henry. And for a special treat, just this once, I have your favorite chocolate syrup. Henry's face lit up. His hand shot out and took hold of the syrup pitcher, but just as he was about to pour the sweet brown mixture over his pancakes, he changed his mind. You know what, Mom, he said. Just this once, I think I'll skip it. Plain old maple syrup will do. The family stared at Henry, as well they might. It was the first time they had ever seen Henry turn away from anything that had to do with chocolate. His father's smile was as wide as a river. Enid, he said, I think our little one is growing up fast. Henry was into his pancakes now, and they were quickly disappearing. The syrup was good and mapley. The pancakes had a delicious wheat flavor and washed down with cold milk. It was extra good, but still, something was missing. Some taste, some kind of spark that would make it even better. There was a small can of cinnamon on the table, with Elizabeth sometimes used on her toast. Henry wondered how cinnamon would taste on what was left of his stack of pancakes. He reached out for the canister and sprinkled a little bit of cinnamon on his plate. Then he tasted. Henry thought, that's pretty good. In fact, it's very good. I wonder how cinnamon would be on sugar, like oatmeal, maybe, or cream of wheat. And maybe cinnamon would be good on other things, ice cream or french fries, or maybe even cinnamon milk. And then Henry had still another thought. Could you ever have too much cinnamon? Could a person overdo it? And was there such thing as cinnamon fever? What do you think? Alrighty, so it seems that everything wrapped up fine for Henry. Was he cured? Yes, he was. And the candy company was going to give him an award. Mac invited the family over to meet his family for dinner. And Henry actually learned his lesson about the chocolate. But what did he do at the end? Instead of chocolate on his pancakes, he put maple syrup and then something else. Cinnamon. And he really liked it. And then he started thinking about cinnamon on toast and oatmeal and cereal and cream of wheats and maybe french fries and ice cream and cinnamon milk. And then he had another thought. Is there such thing as overdoing cinnamon? Is there cinnamon fever? Like I said at the end, what do you think? Guess we'll probably never know. So I hope you enjoyed the book. I'll be back soon with another book. So see you soon.